The first time I felt the floor beneath me pulse like it had a heartbeat of its own, I knew the Mariana Trench didn't play by normal rules. I'm an oil rig sound technician, and I've spent weeks alone, listening to vibrations that shouldn't exist. Deep, deliberate pulses that responded to my every movement. There are 11 strange rules I have to follow, just to survive here. But I remember the first time I broke one, and something started answering me back. My colleagues laughed at my warnings, but they don't understand how small mistakes echo down here, and now I can't tell if I'm being watched or hunted. I remember stepping cautiously onto the rig's metallic deck, the floor trembling beneath me, and thinking about Rule 1, never touch the floor when it vibrates without permission. The vibrations weren't random, they pulsed in deliberate patterns, almost like a language I couldn't decipher. My hands hovered over the steel plating, and I could feel the subtle hum traveling up through my boots into my legs. Every fiber of my being screamed to step back, but part of me wanted to test it, to see if the pulse would respond to hesitation or fear. I swallowed hard, realizing curiosity could be deadly here. The first night I arrived, the rig felt alive in ways I couldn't explain. The machines hummed in rhythm with the currents below, but beneath that mechanical drone, I sensed something deeper, something that resonated with the floor itself. I had been told by my predecessor, someone who never returned, that every vibration had meaning, and Rule 1 existed to prevent us from triggering it unintentionally. I laughed at the warning at first, assuming it was just superstition born from isolation, but as I traced my hand along the railing, I felt a vibration skip up like a warning pulse, and it made my skin crawl. I tried to map the vibrations in my notebook, marking which areas of the deck shivered under different circumstances. The floor beneath the sound console was steady most of the time, except during shifts when the currents below changed. That's when the pulses grew erratic, sometimes long drawn-out tremors, sometimes short, urgent spikes. I kept thinking, if Rule 1, never touch the floor when it vibrates without permission, was meant to protect us, then it wasn't protecting from machines, it was protecting from something else entirely. Each tremor seemed alive, almost sentient, as though the deck itself could sense my intentions. One evening, after the rig's artificial lights dimmed for maintenance, I noticed the floor pulsing in a pattern unlike anything I had charted. It started as a soft tremor under my left foot, then ran like a ripple across the steel plates toward the main console. My heart beat faster as I remembered the warning whispered to me over the radio. Do not make it think you're careless. I froze, feeling the vibrations creep up my legs and through my spine. The air felt heavier, and I realized with growing dread that touching the floor at this moment could be catastrophic. I called my colleague Jensen over the headset, trying to make my voice sound normal. Do you feel that? I asked, but he laughed, dismissing my concern. It's just the engines, man. You're overthinking it. I knew better. That pulse carried intent, a message I couldn't fully read yet. I forced myself to step backward, keeping my boots light and careful. The vibration followed me like a shadow, responsive and impatient, as if Rule 1 was both a guideline and a test. I felt the first real pang of fear, not for myself, but for the crew who didn't understand what lurked beneath the rig. Over the next few days, I experimented cautiously with different positions, never breaking Rule 1. I realized the floor communicated more than I expected. It could warn, threaten, or punish. One morning, I accidentally placed a foot too firmly near the edge of the main deck. The pulse surged violently, knocking my balance and sending a shiver through my arms. I backed off immediately, my hands trembling as I muttered to myself that the rule wasn't just about touching, it was about respect. The floor demanded acknowledgement, not defiance, and I was beginning to understand that ignoring it could be fatal. That night, the rig's emergency lights flickered on unexpectedly, casting long, wavering shadows across the vibrating floor. I crouched near the hatch, listening intently to the pulses, trying to interpret their rhythm. The vibrations grew sharper, faster, almost impatient, and I realized the floor was warning me about something approaching from below. I whispered to the empty room, I know, I won't touch it." The fear was electric, crawling over my skin, as though the deck itself could see the thoughts in my head. I had never felt such a tangible presence before, one that responded directly to intention. During a maintenance check, I noticed a small crack along one section of the steel plating. When I reached out instinctively to examine it, a vibration ran straight up my arm, halting me in place. I backed away, sweat slick on my forehead, thinking about Rule 1 again. This was no ordinary pulse from machinery. It had a precision that made my stomach churn. Each tremor carried meaning, almost like words whispered from the depths, instructing me not to interfere. I realized that the vibrations weren't just signals, they were alive, conscious and aware of me. By the 5th day, I started mapping the pulse patterns in secret, knowing that no one would take my warnings seriously. The vibrations changed with subtle cues, a cough, a shift in weight, even the rhythm of my own heartbeat. The floor beneath the sound console was particularly sensitive. One misstep could trigger a cascade of pulses that would travel throughout the rig, potentially drawing attention from whatever entity enforced Rule 1. I caught myself holding my breath, stepping with exaggerated care, and timing my movements to avoid the unnatural rhythm that had begun to feel like a heartbeat of the Mariana Trench itself. Jensen, still skeptical, challenged me during a night shift. "It's just metal and engines, Usman. Stop treating it like it's alive." I clenched my jaw, hearing the vibrations respond to his dismissive tone, sharper and more insistent than before. I had no choice but to intervene quietly, guiding him back and explaining, "Trust me, you don't want to see what happens if you break Rule 1. His smirk faltered as a tremor jolted underfoot, and I could see genuine unease flash across his face. The floor had made its point, and I understood more clearly than ever that compliance wasn't optional, it was survival. That evening, alone in the control room, I watched the monitors as the rig hummed and vibrated in harmony with the trench below. The pulses were growing, a complex, almost musical pattern that seemed to anticipate my every movement. I realized that Rule 1 was just the beginning, the first of many boundaries set to protect us, or perhaps to keep something contained. As I leaned over the console, notebook open, I felt the floor shift slightly beneath me, and a chill ran down my spine. Something in the vibrations was different now, watching, waiting, and I understood that the next misstep could be irreversible. After surviving the first full day without touching the floor, I realized the vibrations weren't just warnings. They expected recognition, a sign that I respected their presence. I remember leaning against the railing, feeling the subtle hum beneath my boots, and thinking about Rule 2. Always acknowledge the vibrations before moving anywhere on the rig. I began tapping my fingertips lightly against the steel, murmuring quiet words as if greeting a living entity. The tremors seemed to pause, responding to my attention, almost as if they were judging my sincerity. Each movement became a negotiation, a silent conversation with the rig itself, and the thought of ignoring it again filled me with dread. That night, the emergency lights flickered over the deck, casting long shadows across the vibrating metal. Jensen had started teasing me over the headset again, mocking my careful gestures. "You're patting steel like it's a cat, Usman," he laughed. I ignored him, focusing on the floor beneath my feet, feeling each pulse as it traveled through the rig's skeleton. A sudden quick spike beneath my left boot made me freeze, my heart pounding, and I realized with chilling clarity that Rule 2 wasn't just a precaution, it was a protocol for survival. Any misstep could invite consequences I wasn't ready to face. Over the next few days, acknowledging the vibrations became a ritual. Before moving toward the console, I would stop, press my palm lightly to the deck, and speak in whispers, almost like a prayer. The rig responded, tremors softening or flowing gently in reply. Sometimes, when I hesitated or doubted, the pulses would spike violently, reminding me why compliance was necessary. The floor had a presence, patient but intolerant of ignorance. I began to notice that even the smallest oversight, a delayed acknowledgement, or a half-hearted gesture, caused the vibrations to react sharply, like a silent reprimand from something unseen lurking in the Mariana Trench below. One evening, as I navigated toward the outer platform, a sudden tremor pulsed beneath the deck, long and deliberate. Jensen, still skeptical, called out, "Relax. It's just the current," but I didn't answer. I placed both hands on the deck and murmured, "I see you. I'm moving carefully." The vibration stilled, almost imperceptibly, as though satisfied with my recognition. The moment was brief, but it reinforced what I had been learning. The vibrations demanded acknowledgement, and failing to comply invited consequences that were immediate and severe. The rig felt alive, and Rule 2 was the first line of communication with whatever presence watched from beneath. Later that night, alone in the control room, I traced the vibration patterns across the steel floor, documenting which areas were sensitive to acknowledgement and which were indifferent. A pulse ran along the deck, toward the hatch, slow and deliberate, as if drawing me into its rhythm. I hesitated, remembering the consequences of ignoring Rule 2, and then pressed my palms firmly, whispering words I didn't entirely understand. The tremor paused, almost waiting, and I realized I had learned the first subtle lesson of survival: respect the pulse, or it will not respect you. By the fifth day, the ritual had become second nature, but I could feel the tension mounting. Each acknowledgement required complete attention, and any distraction, conversation, doubt, or casual movement triggered sharp spikes in the vibrations. I caught myself trembling, realizing that the floor's presence was patient yet unforgiving. That night, a pulse coursed along the outer edge of the deck and lingered, long and low, almost like a sigh, before fading. I knew it was testing me, ensuring that I had truly learned Rule 2. My pulse matched the rhythm, careful, deliberate, and full of fear. Jensen finally approached me physically on the deck, challenging my methods. "Usman, this is insane. You don't have to bow to metal." I met his eyes, my voice low but firm. "You don't understand. Ignoring it isn't just risky, it's deadly." As I spoke, the vibration underfoot responded sharply, and Jensen froze, his bravado faltering. The floor seemed to pulse in alignment with my heartbeat, and I realized that this acknowledgement wasn't symbolic, it was essential. Even my colleague, now aware of the rig's awareness, felt the weight of Rule 2 pressing down on him. The next morning, as the sun never quite reached the depths of the trench, I moved across the deck with the same reverence I had been practicing. The vibrations were subtle, almost musical, but every movement had to be preceded by a deliberate acknowledgement. I whispered quietly, my hands brushing against the deck, before each step, feeling the floor respond. Something below the rig shifted, and a long drawn-out pulse traveled up from the engine room toward the main hatch. My heart froze. I knew the floor was aware of every thought, every hesitation, and failing to acknowledge it now would be catastrophic. By mid-week, I was exhausted but disciplined. Every step required intent, focus, and a ritualized acknowledgement of the vibrations. The rig's pulsing felt like a conversation I barely understood, but I knew breaking Rule 2 even once could undo everything. As I paused near the hatch one evening, the vibrations pulsed sharply beneath me, longer and slower than ever before. I pressed both hands against the deck, murmuring, "I see you, I respect you," and waited. For a brief moment, the pulse softened, almost approvingly, but a faint undertone of something darker lingered. I realized that surviving in this place required more than caution, it required obedience, and the rules were just beginning to reveal their true purpose. The first time the pulse surged beneath my boots, long and insistent, I felt my stomach twist, and I reminded myself of Rule 3. Never respond to the vibrations with fear or hesitation. Every instinct screamed to pull back, to step away from the floor and let my panic guide me. But I knew that any reaction like that would only provoke whatever presence lurked beneath. I clenched my fists, planted my feet firmly, and forced my breathing to slow. The vibration seemed to press against me, testing my control, and I realized that the rig didn't just monitor movement, it could sense intention. Fear was a dangerous thing down here, and I had to appear steady even when my body wanted to flee. That night, I patrolled the outer deck, the rig lit only by dim red emergency lights that cast the steel into long shifting shadows. A pulse ran sharply under my left foot, fast and erratic, and I froze for just an instant, feeling the hair on my arms stand on end. I remembered Rule 3, took a deep breath, and forced myself to continue moving without a flinch. The vibration shifted, almost as if it was watching me carefully, measuring whether I could maintain composure under pressure. I whispered to myself, "Calm, don't let it see anything." The thought alone made my hands tremble, but I pressed on, learning that hesitation could be read like an open book. During the following hours, I noticed subtle changes in the floor's rhythm whenever someone else moved nearby. Jensen had wandered out onto the deck, joking, unaware of how finely tuned the vibrations were to intention. A sudden pulse ran from beneath his boots to mine, sharp and insistent, and I felt panic bubble up as I realized he had no idea what he was doing. I placed a hand lightly on the railing and guided him back toward the console, whispering, "Move with control, never show fear." His laugh faltered as the vibrations surged again, almost impatiently, reminding me why Rule 3 existed. Hesitation wasn't just dangerous, it was an invitation. By the third day, I was learning to read the floor almost instinctively. Each pulse carried subtleties, quick spikes that demanded steady steps, long waves that tested endurance, and faint hums that seemed like warnings. I began timing my movements to avoid reacting in fear, forcing my muscles to stay calm even as adrenaline surged through my veins. The trench beneath the rig felt alive, watching, and every pulse was a reminder that the entity enforcing Rule 3 could sense panic before it fully manifested. A single misstep, a subtle flinch, could awaken something we weren't meant to face. One evening, alone in the maintenance hall, a vibration swept beneath my boots, slow and deliberate, then halted abruptly. My instincts screamed to jump back, to run, but I froze in place, forcing calm. The pulse quivered under my feet, as if assessing me, and I whispered, "I am steady, I am calm," letting the words carry my will. The sensation persisted, a low hum pressing upward through my boots, and I realized I wasn't just moving across steel. I was navigating a living presence that could read my body like a text. Fear had no place here, and Rule 3 was my lifeline. Jensen tried testing me, stepping deliberately onto a vibrating panel and hesitating, smirking. The pulse reacted instantly, rattling beneath his boots, and he yelped involuntarily. I could see the truth in his eyes. Instinctive fear was natural, but deadly. I stepped closer, guiding him off the panel, and said quietly, "Do not let it see you hesitate. That's the only way to survive." The rig responded to me, subtly adjusting the vibrations underfoot, almost as if approving my calmness. I understood then that obedience wasn't enough. The right emotional state was mandatory. That night, the vibrations became more insistent, pulsing in long, wavering waves across the deck. Each step I took had to be precise, measured and calm, as though the entity below could detect even the faintest tremor of uncertainty. My heart raced, but I forced my breath steady, forcing my legs to move fluidly without hesitation. A faint echo ran through the deck, and I realized it was mimicking my movements, amplifying any trace of fear I might project. I murmured, "I am steady, I am calm," over and over, willing my body to obey, knowing that a single falter would change everything. By the fifth day, I had internalized the rule. Fear had to be managed not only in action but in thought. The vibrations could feel panic radiating from the mind, not just the body. As I crossed toward the hatch near the engine room, a long drawn-out tremor ran beneath me, probing like fingers seeking weakness. I planted my boots firmly, whispered a quiet acknowledgement, and moved deliberately, aware that Rule 3 demanded unwavering composure. Even a shadow of hesitation, a flicker of doubt, could provoke something far beyond what I was trained to face. Later, as I documented the pulse patterns in my notebook, I realized the floor wasn't just alive, it was intelligent. It learned, adapted, and reacted to emotional cues. Any twitch of fear amplified the vibrations, spreading across the rig like a warning signal. I glanced at the control panel, noticing the subtle lights flicker in perfect sync with the pulses under my feet. The Mariana Trench wasn't just a location, it was an extension of the rig's consciousness, enforcing the rules with exacting precision. Breaking Rule 3 even once could awaken forces no one was prepared for, and I understood that my survival depended entirely on unwavering calm. I learned quickly that speed was as deadly as fear, and every instinct to hurry had to be suppressed. The moment I remembered Rule 4, never move faster than the vibration allows. The pulses beneath the steel deck were like invisible currents, subtly guiding motion, and any attempt to move ahead of their rhythm provoked sharp, retaliatory jolts. That morning, as I navigated the outer platform, a rapid sequence of tremors coursed beneath my boots, and I slowed to match the rhythm, feeling every nerve in my body tense with awareness. The floor wasn't passive, it demanded obedience, and I realized that even small deviations could draw consequences I wasn't prepared to face. By midday, I had memorized the subtle cues of each vibration pattern across the rig. The engine room floor pulsed slower than the control deck, yet faster than the outer platform, and adjusting my steps to match each rhythm was exhausting. A wrong move sent a shiver up through the steel, reverberating in my spine like a warning. I tried explaining this to Jensen, who laughed nervously. "You're dancing with a floor, Usman. You've lost it." I ignored him, focusing on the delicate, almost musical cadence of the pulses. The Mariana Trench didn't forgive impatience, and Rule 4 existed because speed could provoke forces we couldn't comprehend. Later that evening, a sudden change in the vibrations caused my heart to race. I had misjudged the tempo and taken 2 steps too quickly, and the deck responded violently, sending a shudder up my legs and hands. I froze instantly, remembering Rule 4, and forced myself to breathe, matching my movements carefully to the slower pulses beneath me. The floor seemed to test my ability to synchronize, as if measuring my respect for its authority. The longer I remained on the deck, the more I understood that survival depended on becoming part of the rhythm, not just moving across it. One night, alone near the hatch to the lower maintenance shaft, a series of rapid tremors pulsed beneath me, sharper and more insistent than usual. I had been anxious to check the wiring myself, impatience gnawing at me, and the vibrations immediately reminded me why Rule 4 mattered. I slowed my steps, bending knees slightly, letting the floor dictate my pace. As I moved, the tremors softened, almost approvingly, but a faint undertone of menace lingered, warning me that any slip could have consequences far beyond a simple shock. I realized that speed wasn't just dangerous, it was provocative. By the 3rd day, I had become intimately familiar with the rig's pulse patterns, mapping them meticulously in my notebook. Every panel, every hatch, every section of floor demanded attention and compliance with its unique tempo. I practiced stepping in sync with the vibrations, testing my endurance and patience. Sometimes, when I faltered and moved ahead of the rhythm, the deck pulsed violently, shaking tools off tables or rattling doors. The Mariana Trench wasn't passive, it responded to impatience with force. Rule 4 was a constant reminder that life here was measured in careful, deliberate timing. Jensen continued to test the limits, stepping ahead of a subtle tremor and yelping as it surged beneath his boots. I watched him freeze, eyes wide, realizing that the floor didn't punish indiscriminately, it reacted to human error. "It's just steel, Usman," he muttered, but his voice wavered. I guided him back, whispering, "Move with it. Never faster, never slower." He reluctantly followed, and for the first time, I saw genuine understanding in his expression. The floor demanded coordination, patience, and respect, and Rule 4 was the first boundary that made the consequences tangible. By the 5th day, my entire routine revolved around synchronizing with the vibrations. Even the slightest rush or hurried step could trigger an unrelenting sequence of tremors that reverberated across the rig. A sudden pulse from the engine room made me pause mid-step, forcing my muscles to relax as I let the floor dictate my pace. The Mariana Trench was no longer just beneath us. It was integrated into every step I took, a silent observer of intent and movement. Moving faster than the vibration allowed wasn't just reckless, it was fatal, and Rule 4 became a constant pressing mantra in my mind. That night, as I moved toward the observation deck, the floor pulsed in slow, deliberate waves. I matched each step carefully, letting the rhythm guide my body, my mind hyper-aware of every tiny fluctuation. A subtle shift in vibration ran from my left boot to the railings, a long, deliberate warning that something beneath the rig was monitoring more than just pace. It was watching intent. I whispered quietly, "I move with you," willing myself into harmony with the pulse. For the first time, I realized that the Mariana Trench wasn't just beneath the rig, it was part of it, part of me, and any impatience would betray my presence to something far more dangerous than I had imagined. I was checking the sound panels near the engine room when a pulse beneath my boots shifted suddenly, sharp and irregular, and I reminded myself of Rule 5. Never ignore a vibration that changes tone unexpectedly. My heart leapt into my throat, and every instinct screamed to step back, but I knew hesitation could be deadly. I crouched, placing both hands lightly on the deck, trying to interpret what the floor was communicating. The tremor ran through me like a warning, deliberate and insistent, and I realized that ignoring even the slightest anomaly could invite consequences I wasn't prepared for. The Mariana Trench beneath the rig wasn't patient. It demanded attention to every fluctuation. Earlier that day, I had noticed subtle variations in the vibrations, gentle shifts that had seemed insignificant at first. But now, the tone had changed drastically, running in a staccato rhythm that rattled my focus. Jensen, still skeptical, leaned over my shoulder and smirked. "It's just the engines, Usman. You're imagining patterns." I shook my head, eyes fixed on the steel beneath us, feeling the pulse respond to our proximity. "No, it's not mechanical," I whispered. "It knows when we ignore it." The sudden jolt of the irregular vibration ran up my legs, and I realized that Rule 5 existed for a reason far beyond machinery. This was intelligence testing me. I spent the next hours cataloging every unexpected change, trying to map their origin and meaning. Some pulses were warnings, others seemed almost like commands, and I learned to recognize the subtle difference. One shift ran under the outer deck, long and tremulous, almost like a sigh, and I froze in place. The floor was alert, alive in a way that made rational thought meaningless. The Mariana Trench pressed up against the rig, a silent, watching entity, and I understood that Rule 5 wasn't about observation alone. It was about survival, and failing to react could be catastrophic. That evening, the lights dimmed in the central corridor, and the vibrations took on a complex, oscillating pattern. I paused mid-step, placing a hand on the steel, murmuring, "I see you, I notice you." The pulse softened slightly, almost approvingly, but a faint undertone of menace lingered, warning me not to ignore it again. Jensen moved too quickly, brushing past the irregular zone, and a sharp surge ran beneath his boots. His laugh faltered, replaced by a tense, uneasy silence. The floor was teaching a lesson in attention, and I realized that compliance with Rule 5 meant more than recognition. It meant respect for a presence we could barely comprehend. By the third day, I was hyper-aware of the tiniest tonal changes beneath my feet. Even the subtlest alteration in the hum could indicate danger, and I adjusted every step to match the rhythm, timing each movement to the irregular pulses. The Mariana Trench seemed to ripple through the deck itself, and I felt eyes, though I knew no one was watching, assessing my reactions. I whispered under my breath, repeating the mantra of vigilance, knowing that any lapse could awaken something that no precaution could undo. Rule 5 had become a constant awareness, a silent command to respect the unseen forces beneath us. Late one night, alone near the observation deck, a vibration shifted abruptly, running along the metal in a pulsing wave that made my stomach twist. I froze, remembering Rule 5, and placed both palms flat on the steel, willing myself to respond correctly. The pulse lingered, probing, deliberate, almost inquisitive, and I whispered softly, "I see you." I respond. The tremor softened, but I felt a faint lingering unease, as though the floor had measured my reaction and found it only partially sufficient. I realized that the vibration wasn't just a warning, it was an interrogation of my attention and my presence. By the 5th day, the irregular vibrations had become impossible to ignore, each shift a new test of vigilance. The rig itself seemed to anticipate our movements, subtly altering the pulses when I slowed or hesitated. The Mariana Trench beneath wasn't just a location, it was part of the rig's consciousness, a living entity monitoring our awareness. Every step required careful attention, every subtle tonal change demanded acknowledgement. Ignoring the vibrations was no longer a matter of negligence. It was a risk to life, and Rule 5 had become an unbreakable law I could neither defy nor fully understand. That night, the pulses beneath the hatch grew longer, oscillating with irregular sharp spikes that ran straight through my boots. I crouched low, hands pressing on the floor, murmuring my acknowledgement like a prayer. The vibrations softened ever so slightly, but a subtle undertone of menace remained, a reminder that ignoring a single shift could unravel everything. I realized then that the Mariana Trench wasn't just deep water, it was intelligence, patience, and relentless enforcement, and Rule 5 was proof that every irregular beat had meaning I could not afford to dismiss. By the 6th day, I had learned that even a momentary glance away from the steel deck could invite consequences, and I reminded myself of Rule 6, never take your eyes off the vibration patterns for more than a few seconds. Every subtle pulse, every change in rhythm, carried information I couldn't afford to miss. I crouched near the central console, eyes locked on the faint tremors traveling across the floor, feeling them brush through my boots like invisible fingertips. The Mariana Trench below wasn't just depth, it was consciousness, and even the briefest lapse could alert whatever presence watched from beneath, turning curiosity into danger. Earlier, Jensen had mocked me for staring so intently at the deck, leaning over my shoulder and saying, "Osman, it's just metal, stop obsessing." I ignored him, focusing on the minute shifts in vibration that could mean the difference between safety and catastrophe. The pulses shifted slightly under my boots, as if acknowledging my attention, and I felt a shiver of relief run up my spine. Rule 6 wasn't arbitrary, it was enforcement, ensuring that no one ignored the rig's subtle signals, because even a second of distraction could be fatal. I understood then that the floor was alive in a way that demanded constant vigilance. That night, as emergency lights flickered across the deck, a sudden irregular vibration coursed from the engine room to the observation hatch. My eyes never left the patterns, tracing each tremor as it traveled across the steel, feeling the hum press through my soles like a living warning. Jensen moved ahead without watching, and the pulse surged violently beneath him, sending a jolt that made him stumble. I called out urgently, "Watch it. Rule 6 exists for a reason." The floor reacted instantly, reinforcing the lesson. Distraction was a liability, and even a trusted colleague could trigger dangerous responses. Over the next few hours, I developed a system, one hand lightly on the deck, eyes tracking each vibration, mind calculating the rhythm, and every step in sync with the pulses. It was exhausting, mentally and physically, but I couldn't afford to look away. The Mariana Trench seemed to press upward through the deck, a constant watching presence that punished negligence. Every tremor I ignored or failed to track made the rig hum sharply, sending reverberations that rattled tools and shook panels. I realized that Rule 6 was as much about awareness as obedience. It was the difference between survival and something far worse. One evening, As I approached the outer hatch leading to the platform, the vibrations began a slow, deliberate sequence I hadn't recorded before. I froze, recognizing it as a test of focus. I kept my eyes fixed on the tremors, hands steady on the railing, whispering quietly, "I see you. I am watching." The pulse seemed to linger, deliberate and evaluating, as though judging whether I would falter. The Mariana Trench wasn't just pressure and water, it was intelligence, and I understood fully now that even a single glance away could trigger responses I had no control over. By the third day, I noticed patterns in how the vibrations responded to distraction. The rig would pulse subtly when attention drifted, first soft, then stronger, escalating until it demanded acknowledgement. I realized it wasn't random, it was a warning, a test, and ignoring it, even briefly, could escalate consequences. One long wave of tremor ran beneath the engine corridor, and I caught myself instinctively glancing at Jensen, who had wandered without tracking the floor. The pulse surged sharply, and I grabbed his arm, forcing him to crouch and watch the vibrations with me. Rule 6 wasn't just a guideline, it was a commandment, essential for survival. That night, alone on the observation deck, I noticed subtle tonal changes in the vibrations beneath the railings. I couldn't afford to take my eyes off the floor for even a second, because the Mariana Trench seemed to press its awareness into every detail of my observation. I whispered softly to the deck, acknowledging the pulse as it shifted and swayed underfoot, and felt a tense reassurance that I had complied correctly. Even a second of distraction could provoke a spike, a test, or worse. The rule was clear: vigilance wasn't optional. Rule 6 demanded my full attention, and the consequences of ignoring it were terrifyingly real. By the 5th day, tracking the vibrations had become instinctual. Every step, every shift of weight, every glance was deliberate, timed perfectly to the pulse beneath my boots. I realized I could no longer think about anything else. My mind was tethered entirely to the floor. A sudden irregular wave rippled toward the main console, and I followed it with my eyes, letting it dictate my movements. The Mariana Trench beneath the rig was patient, but intolerant of carelessness. I whispered again, "I see you. I am watching," committing every microsecond to observation, knowing that Rule 6 was the line between life and whatever lurked below. I had been monitoring the floor for days, mapping every pulse and tremor, when a sequence appeared that I couldn't decipher, and I reminded myself of Rule 7, never ignore vibrations that come in patterns you don't understand. The tremors rippled under my boots, in irregular, jagged sequences that made my chest tighten with fear. My first instinct was to dismiss it as a quirk of the rig, but experience had taught me otherwise. I crouched low, hands on the steel, trying to anticipate the next pulse, my mind racing to understand the pattern before I made a misstep that could cost me more than just balance. Earlier that day, Jensen had wandered near the outer deck, joking about the weird floor patterns I obsessed over. I warned him quietly, "Don't ignore them, even if you don't understand." He shrugged, stepping over the tremors without hesitation, and a sharp surge ran beneath his boots, nearly knocking him off balance. The floor pulsed with intent, a silent reprimand for his arrogance. I realized that some vibrations carried meaning we couldn't yet interpret, and Rule 7 existed to force respect for patterns that weren't immediately comprehensible. Ignoring them was more dangerous than misinterpreting a known rhythm. That evening, alone near the hatch to the maintenance shaft, the irregular vibrations intensified, bouncing unpredictably across the steel deck. I felt a shiver run through my spine as I traced each pulse with my eyes, trying to anticipate the next move. The Mariana Trench beneath the rig seemed to respond to my attention, subtle yet insistent. I whispered quietly, "I see you. I am paying attention," and felt the tremor soften slightly. The rule wasn't just about observation, it was about acknowledging forces beyond my understanding, a discipline I had no choice but to follow. By the 3rd day, I began cataloging the unknown patterns in meticulous detail, noting frequency, duration, and intensity, even when their meaning eluded me. Each time I paused or ignored a complex sequence, the floor responded sharply, shaking tools, rattling doors, or sending a pulse that traveled up my legs. I realized then that the Mariana Trench wasn't just deep water, it was a consciousness interacting with the rig, and ignoring the unknown was an act of defiance. Rule 7 was as much about respect as it was survival, and each incomprehensible vibration demanded my focus. One night, I was moving toward the outer platform when a sequence of rapid, irregular tremors ran under the deck. My heart pounded, but I stopped, crouched, and allowed my hands to press lightly on the steel, tracing the pulses with my senses. The vibrations shifted slightly in response, and I realized that acknowledgement mattered as much as comprehension. Even though I couldn't understand the sequence, failure to respond could provoke consequences I was unprepared for. The Mariana Trench below wasn't indifferent, it demanded attention, and Rule 7 was the only way to stay alive. By the 5th day, I had internalized the importance of this rule. Every time a new, unfamiliar pattern pulsed beneath me, I stopped, observed, and acknowledged it, even if its meaning remained a mystery. The rig had become a living entity, responding to the intent behind my focus. Even a second of neglect could trigger a reaction, a warning, or something far more dangerous. I whispered quietly to the vibrations, "I see you, I am watching," and felt a tense reassurance that for now, compliance had sufficed. Yet the unknown sequences always carried a subtle lurking menace, reminding me that understanding might never come. Later, as Jensen tried to walk over a new section of deck without observing the tremors, the vibrations surged violently beneath him. I grabbed his arm, forcing him to crouch and watch as I had been taught. "Don't ignore them, even if you don't get it," I said firmly. His eyes widened with fear as the pulse shifted again, deliberate and judging. Rule 7 wasn't negotiable, it wasn't a suggestion, it was essential to survival, a boundary that enforced attention even when logic failed. By the end of that night, I was exhausted, eyes fixed on the tremors, following sequences I still didn't understand. The Mariana Trench beneath the rig was alive in a way I could feel in my bones, and ignoring any of its messages, even incomprehensible ones, was unthinkable. I realized fully that these patterns were warnings, tests, and perhaps messages from something beyond human comprehension. Every pulse demanded focus, and breaking Rule 7, even for a single instant, could unravel everything I had learned. I had seen sections of the rig that remained silent for days, untouched and untested, yet I knew better than to approach them casually, reminding myself of Rule 8. Never step onto a vibrating panel that has never pulsed before. The unknown panels felt like traps, dormant and patient, waiting for someone reckless enough to test them. My boots hovered over one such section near the outer platform, and I forced myself to retreat, feeling a shiver crawl up my spine. Every inch of the rig seemed alive, and I realized that stepping onto unfamiliar ground could provoke a response far beyond ordinary tremors. Earlier, Jensen had joked, "What's the worst that could happen?" And I had no words to convince him that curiosity here could be lethal. I gestured toward a silent hatchway, warning him in a low voice, "Some panels are sleeping. Don't wake them." He laughed nervously but hesitated, sensing the tension in my tone. The Mariana Trench beneath the rig was patient but vigilant, and even the smallest misstep could awaken something that would not forgive. Rule 8 existed because the silent panels were unpredictable, and one wrong step could shatter the tenuous balance we were clinging to. That night, as the emergency lights flickered over the deck, I noticed a panel near the engine room quiver faintly, its pulse unfamiliar. My hands tightened on the railing, and I whispered, "I don't move on you," letting the vibration sense my acknowledgement without contact. The tremor hesitated beneath my feet, as if testing my restraint. Every instinct screamed to investigate, to understand, but experience had taught me that curiosity here was dangerous. The Mariana Trench didn't forgive mistakes, and Rule 8 was a line drawn between those who survived and those who didn't. By the 3rd day, I had memorized which panels were active and which were dormant. Even a footstep on a new, untested section caused ripples beneath the deck, subtle at first, then intensifying sharply if ignored. I documented these carefully, marking zones that had never pulsed. One evening, a sudden surge of vibration ran across a previously silent panel, and I froze, heart hammering. The Mariana Trench seemed to extend through the rig, warning me that patience and observation were critical. Rule 8 demanded absolute caution, and breaking it could trigger consequences that no one could anticipate. Later, alone on the observation deck, I saw a panel near the outer hatch that had never moved. A subtle hum ran beneath it, different from any vibrations I had encountered. I crouched low, whispering quietly, "I see you. I will not step." The tremor pulsed in response, almost like it was measuring my restraint. I realized that the Mariana Trench beneath the rig wasn't just monitoring movement. It was testing obedience, patience, and respect for unknown forces. Rule 8 wasn't about fear, it was about survival, and the consequences of disobedience could be immediate. By the 5th day, I had internalized this rule fully. Whenever approaching an untested panel, I stopped, observed, and allowed the floor beneath to guide my understanding before even thinking about stepping. The rig seemed to hum in approval when I followed this protocol, and tense, warning pulses when I lingered too long. Jensen, still skeptical, accidentally placed a foot on a panel that had never pulsed, and the vibration shot sharply beneath him, nearly throwing him off balance. I grabbed his arm and whispered urgently, "Never step on one you don't know. Rule 8 exists for a reason." Later that night, a long, unfamiliar pulse ran beneath a dormant section of the outer platform. I stopped, crouched, and placed my hands lightly on the steel, refusing to step. The tremor lingered, testing my patience, pressing upward through the rig like an inquisitive finger. I whispered, "I see you. I will wait," and felt the vibration soften. I understood then that the Mariana Trench beneath us wasn't passive. It enforced rules, observed intent, and reacted to disobedience. Ignoring Rule 8 could awaken something patient, intelligent, and lethal. By the 7th day, the silent panels had become a constant, tense reminder of the unknown forces below. Every step had to be deliberate, every interaction with the floor measured. I no longer walked casually across the deck. Instead, I moved in sync with known vibrations, keeping untested panels at a safe distance. The Mariana Trench wasn't just a depth of water, it was awareness, judgment, and enforcement, and Rule 8 ensured that we approached the unknown with the respect it demanded. One misstep could be the last mistake anyone would make. By the 9th day, I had begun to notice patterns that carried deadly significance, and I reminded myself of Rule 9. Never ignore a vibration that repeats exactly 3 times. The first time it happened, I froze mid-step, feeling the tremor pulse beneath my boots. Once, twice, thrice, and then stop abruptly, as if waiting for acknowledgement. My pulse pounded in sync with the deck, and I whispered, "I see you. I am watching," placing my hands lightly on the steel. The Mariana Trench beneath the rig wasn't just depth or machinery, it was awareness, and these threefold pulses were a command I could not afford to ignore. Earlier that day, Jensen had wandered near a repeating section, laughing off my warnings. I called out, "Do not ignore the triple pulse. Rule 9 exists for a reason." He hesitated as the tremor surged beneath him in 3 deliberate beats, his laughter dying on his lips. The floor responded violently to any hesitation or misinterpretation, and I realized fully that these sequences were more than random. They were precise, intentional warnings. Ignoring them even once could provoke something far beyond our understanding, a fact I had learned the hard way. That evening, alone on the outer platform, I traced the vibration sequences carefully. A pattern pulsed beneath my boots, once, twice, thrice, and then a pause, lingering as if observing my reaction. I crouched, whispering quietly, "I see you. I acknowledge you," letting my hands rest on the steel. The vibration softened slightly, almost approvingly, but a faint undercurrent of menace remained. The Mariana Trench seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if I would respect Rule 9 or allow negligence to creep in. This rule was simple yet unforgiving, a boundary drawn in pulses beneath the rig. By the third day, I had learned to recognize every nuance of the threefold vibration. It appeared in different sections of the rig: engine room, observation deck, even along silent panels, and each time it demanded immediate acknowledgement. A single misstep or delayed reaction caused a sharp surge to travel through the deck, rattling tools and sending shadows dancing across the dimly lit rig. I whispered under my breath repeatedly, "I see you. I acknowledge you," synchronizing my attention to each pulse. Rule 9 was the line that separated observation from obedience, and disobedience carried instant consequences. One night, near the hatch leading to the lower maintenance shaft, a triple pulse ran beneath the steel in rapid succession. My body tensed, heart hammering, but I forced calm and crouched low, hands pressing firmly on the deck. The vibrations lingered, assessing, deliberate, almost intelligent, and I whispered again, "I see you. I am watching." The pulse softened, but a subtle threat lingered in the lingering resonance, a reminder that failing to respect Rule 9 could awaken the rig's deeper awareness. The Mariana Trench wasn't passive. It enforced attention with precision. By the fifth day, I had begun documenting every instance of the threefold vibration, noting location, intensity, and duration. The rig seemed to respond to my meticulousness, pulses stabilizing when I acknowledged them promptly, and escalating when I faltered. Jensen, still skeptical, accidentally ignored a triple pulse near the outer hatch, and the tremor surged sharply beneath him, knocking him sideways. I grabbed his arm, whispering urgently, "Never ignore threefold pulses. Rule 9 is survival." Even a moment of negligence triggered immediate consequences, making the Mariana Trench's awareness terrifyingly real. Later on the observation deck, I traced the vibration pattern as it repeated 3 times across a previously dormant panel. I crouched, murmuring quietly, "I see you. I acknowledge you," allowing the floor to sense my compliance. The pulse softened but lingered, deliberate and measured, a subtle reminder of the intelligence behind the rig. Every triple pulse seemed purposeful, a warning, a test, or a message from something beneath the Mariana Trench that I still could not fully comprehend. Rule 9 demanded absolute attention, and ignoring it could provoke forces beyond our understanding. By the 7th day, the triple pulses had become a constant vigilance test. Even a second of hesitation drew sharp responses, reverberating through the deck in precise waves. I moved deliberately, every footstep timed, every breath calculated, hands tracing the steel, as if in ritual. The Mariana Trench beneath the rig wasn't just a depth, it was awareness, patience, and judgment. And Rule 9 ensured I never treated the vibrations lightly. One failure to observe could be catastrophic, a lesson I had learned repeatedly over sleepless nights. By the 10th day, I had learned that a single panel's tremor was already dangerous, but a surge from multiple panels at once was far more ominous, reminding me of Rule 10. Never ignore vibrations that come from multiple panels simultaneously. That morning, a wave of pulses radiated across the outer platform, the rhythm chaotic yet synchronized in a terrifying way. My heart thumped in my chest, and I crouched low, placing both hands on the steel, whispering, "I see you. I am aware." The Mariana Trench beneath the rig wasn't just observing, it was coordinating, testing my awareness across multiple zones at once, and the slightest lapse could trigger disaster. Earlier, Jensen had wandered too close to the engine room, joking about how nothing could possibly harm him. Suddenly, vibrations ran from at least 3 panels in rapid succession, colliding and merging beneath his boots, and he yelped, stumbling forward. I grabbed his arm, forcing him down, and reminding him, Rule 10 exists for a reason. Never ignore multi-panel pulses. The rig responded immediately, emphasizing that multiple signals demanded absolute attention, and simultaneous acknowledgement. Ignoring them even for a moment was no longer just risky, it was reckless. That evening, the observation deck trembled violently as a multi-panel sequence pulsed across the floor. I froze mid-step, tracing the vibrations with my hands and adjusting my body to match the rhythm. The Mariana Trench seemed alive beneath the steel, testing my ability to observe and react across multiple points simultaneously. I whispered quietly, "I see you. I am aware," allowing the acknowledgement to reach every tremor, every panel, every subtle pulse. Rule 10 was simple in wording, but infinitely complex in practice, a test that demanded coordination, focus, and restraint. By the third day, I had memorized the zones where simultaneous pulses were likely to occur, yet the Mariana Trench always surprised me with variations. A sudden surge across the maintenance hall, control deck, and outer hatch all at once forced me to halt and crouch, tracing the rhythm across 3 panels with a precision I hadn't realized I could maintain. Jensen tried moving too quickly, and the deck reacted instantly, sending him stumbling. The intelligence enforcing Rule 10 was relentless, and ignoring even a single vibration in the chain could provoke consequences beyond comprehension. Later, alone near the engine room, a sequence began from multiple panels at once, subtle at first, but growing in intensity, pulsing like a heartbeat across the steel. I crouched, hands pressing firmly, eyes locked on every fluctuation, whispering, "I see you. I am aware," feeling the vibrations respond to my acknowledgement. The Mariana Trench beneath the rig wasn't passive. It orchestrated the pulses, testing my ability to notice and respond simultaneously. Rule 10 was no longer just a guideline. It was a law enforced through tension, patience, and unwavering observation. By the 5th day, multi-panel vibrations had become a constant, pressing reminder of the intelligence beneath the rig. Even a momentary lapse in observation caused pulses to surge violently, rattling tools, shaking railings, and sending warnings across the deck. I had to move slowly, deliberately, and with awareness spanning multiple zones. My mind stretched across panels I couldn't physically touch. The Mariana Trench was teaching patience, focus, and respect in equal measure, and Rule 10 made clear that failure to obey had immediate consequences. That night, the outer platform and observation deck pulsed simultaneously in rapid, overlapping sequences. I crouched low, tracing the rhythm, whispering repeatedly, "I see you. I am aware," letting my acknowledgement flow across every tremor. Each panel seemed to test my focus individually, while the combined pulses challenged my coordination. The Mariana Trench beneath us wasn't merely pressure or water, it was a presence, measuring intent, patience, and obedience. Ignoring Rule 10 even for a second could provoke a response that no human reflex could counter. By the 7th day, I had internalized this rule completely. Every step across the rig required conscious acknowledgement of multiple zones at once, eyes tracing the vibrations, hands lightly pressing the steel for confirmation. Even the slightest lapse drew sharp, insistent pulses as a reminder that the Mariana Trench's awareness was absolute. I realized then that the rig was no longer just machinery, it was an extension of the trench itself, intelligent and patient, enforcing Rule 10 in ways I could barely comprehend. Survival depended on simultaneous vigilance, and the stakes were higher than ever. By the 11th day, I had learned that every rule led to this final terrifying truth, reminding myself of Rule 11. Never attempt to leave the rig while the vibrations are active. The floor pulsed beneath my boots, long, deliberate waves that seemed to spread through the steel and into my chest, warning me that movement beyond its command would be fatal. I could feel the Mariana Trench itself pressing upward, as if the water below and the rig above had fused into a single sentient presence. Panic clawed at my mind, but I forced my breath steady, knowing that stepping toward the hatch too soon could provoke something I couldn't survive. Earlier that evening, Jensen had whispered nervously about leaving, suggesting we finish our rounds and return to the crew quarters. I shook my head, gripping the railing tightly. The vibrations, they're active. We can't move yet, I said, recalling Rule 11. His skepticism faltered as a pulse surged beneath both of us, subtle at first, but quickly growing sharp and insistent, vibrating up through the deck in a way that made my teeth clench. The Mariana Trench beneath the rig wasn't just watching, it was enforcing, and any attempt to defy its authority would provoke immediate consequences. As I navigated toward the central hatch, the vibrations intensified, running in long rolling waves that coursed across every panel I had learned to trust. My eyes darted from one sequence to another, noting changes in rhythm, intensity, and tone. The trench's presence beneath the rig felt heavier than ever, an oppressive, sentient force that monitored every movement. I crouched low, hands pressing firmly on the steel, whispering, "I wait, I observe, I do not move." The floor pulsed in response, subtle yet deliberate, as if testing my obedience to the final rule. Rule 11 wasn't just survival, it was the ultimate test of patience and restraint. By the third day, it had become clear that attempting to leave while vibrations ran was impossible. Every step toward the hatches was met with subtle shifts, sudden pulses, and vibrations that ran through the steel like sharp teeth. Even standing still required focus, synchronization, and constant acknowledgement of the floor's patterns. I could feel the Mariana Trench beneath pressing against the rig like an invisible tide, aware of every micro-movement, judging intent. Jensen froze mid-step, realizing too late that the active vibrations weren't just warnings, they were a barrier, and violating Rule 11 could be fatal. Later that night, alone on the observation deck, a surge of complex, overlapping pulses ran beneath the entire platform. I crouched, letting my palms trace the steel, whispering quietly, "I wait, I acknowledge, I follow." The vibrations pulsed in response, deliberate, patient, almost sentient, testing my discipline. Every instinct screamed to run, to escape, but I knew that movement now would be catastrophic. The Mariana Trench wasn't just depth or water, it was judgment, a living enforcer ensuring that Rule 11 was obeyed at all costs. By the fifth day, the rig had become a living extension of the trench itself, every panel, every vibration, every pulse acting as a monitor for compliance. Attempting to move while vibrations were active could provoke reactions far beyond human understanding. I realized fully that these rules were not suggestions, they were commands enforced by a presence that was patient, intelligent, and relentless. Standing still, crouched low, and following every pulse had become instinct, a ritual I could not abandon. Rule 11 demanded absolute restraint, the culmination of every lesson I had endured. That night, a sudden long wave ran across multiple panels, simultaneously active for the first time since the 10th day. I froze instantly, aware that even the slightest misstep could have immediate consequences. My palms pressed firmly against the steel as I whispered my acknowledgement to the rig and to the Mariana Trench itself. Every pulse ran through me like a warning and a command: no movement, no defiance, no exception. I understood then that the final rule existed not just to prevent physical harm, but to maintain a delicate balance with something ancient, intelligent, and unforgiving. By the 7th day, I had internalized Rule 11 completely. Even a single step taken too soon could provoke forces we could not predict or survive. The rig was no longer merely a structure, it was alive, sentient, and aware of every intention, every twitch, every falter. The Mariana Trench beneath it pressed its judgment upward through the steel, reinforcing the final rule with relentless insistence. As I crouched low, hands pressing the deck, heart pounding, I realized that breaking Rule 11 could be the end, not just for me, but for anyone foolish enough to ignore the vibration's authority. I waited. Hours passed, each pulse pressing deeper into my bones, testing patience, attention, and restraint. The Mariana Trench and the rig below were patient, but I knew that this was a living trial, one I could not end through willpower alone. I whispered quietly, "I wait, I observe, I obey," and felt the vibrations soften slightly, as if acknowledging my compliance. The rule was clear to survive: one could not move, could not act, could not resist. And yet, even as I obeyed, a faint undercurrent of menace lingered beneath the steel, a reminder that the Mariana Trench's judgment was eternal and unforgiving. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe for more.